Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD. Today's story begins at a quiet little cafe in Savannah, Georgia, where the soft bubbling of a fish tank fills the air, and a gentle waitress crosses paths with a little girl who hasn't spoken a word to anyone but her mother. But then, one small act of kindness changes everything. If stories like this speak to your heart, stories about healing, hope, and the quiet power of human connection, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. We share new stories every week, and we promise, there's always a little light waiting for you here. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in Savannah, Georgia. The kind of day where the sun cast soft, golden light through the Spanish moss hanging from the old oak trees. On the corner of River Street stood the Glass Pond Cafe, a small family-run diner known not for its food, but for the large fish tank that greeted every guest as they walked in. The tank stretched across the front wall like a living painting, glimmering with silver tetras, bright orange guppies, and slow-gliding angelfish. Kids would often stop there first, pressing their noses against the glass while their parents ordered coffee or sweet tea. Behind the counter that day stood Kayla Monroe, her apron already damp from the lunchtime rush. At 36, she had the patient demeanor of someone who had long ago made peace with the pace of life. She'd grown up in a small town just outside Macon, raising her younger brother after their parents passed. He'd been born with cerebral palsy, and caring for him had shaped her into someone who noticed the small things. A flicker of discomfort. A whisper of joy. The way a person's shoulders rose just before they broke into a smile. Kayla loved animals, especially fish. There was something peaceful about them, the way they moved without hurry, without worry. She even made her own fish food at home using crushed vegetables and seaweed flakes. It had become a little ritual of hers, bringing a small jar of it to work and quietly feeding the cafe's fish in the slow moments between customers. That afternoon, just as the lunch crowd began to thin, the bell above the door jingled softly. In walked a sharply dressed woman, every inch of her posture exuding control. Victoria Lane. At 58, she was known in medical tech circles as a visionary, CEO of a company that had revolutionized at-home monitoring devices for patients with neurological conditions. But those who worked with her described her in other terms: strict, distant, intimidating. She hadn't been seen in public much since her husband's passing 3 years ago. But today, she walked into the Glass Pond Cafe not for a meeting, but because her daughter had pointed at the sign from the car window. Beside her was Ella, a small, delicate-looking girl with a mop of soft brown curls and big, searching eyes. She walked close to her mother, not quite touching, but always within arm's reach. Ella didn't speak. She didn't like loud places, didn't make eye contact, and flinched at sudden sounds. Her diagnosis read, sensory processing disorder. But to Victoria, she was simply Ella, her heart, her reason, and her greatest mystery. The moment they entered, Ella spotted the fish tank. Her footsteps slowed. She stood still, watching. Mesmerized. Victoria noticed, of course. She always noticed. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she gestured to a quiet booth by the window. Business first. Kayla walked over to take their order, but her eyes kept drifting toward the little girl standing alone in front of the tank. There was something in the way she stood, still quiet, almost holding her breath, that made Kayla pause. She didn't speak. Didn't move closer. She simply reached into her apron pocket, pulled out the small jar of homemade fish food, and set it gently on the edge of the tank. No words. Just a glance toward the child, an invitation, not a command. And that was where everything began. Ella lingered near the fish tank, but not too close. She stood several feet away, arms tucked in, eyes wide with quiet awe. The soft swirl of fins and colors held her attention in a way few things ever did. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as if afraid even her breath might disturb the peace inside the glass. From the corner of the cafe, Kayla noticed. She had seen children watch the fish before, some with laughter, others with curiosity, but this was different. The little girl seemed attuned. as if the tank spoke a language only she understood. Kayla didn't approach. She simply walked to the tank, reached into her apron, and pulled out her small jar of fish food. Without a word, she placed it gently on the ledge, then took a step back. "The fish will come if you sprinkle it softly," she said, her voice low, almost like a secret. "They like quiet people best." Ella turned her head slowly. Her eyes met Kayla's, just for a second. Then silently, she reached forward, lifted the lid, and pinched a small bit of the food. She dropped it gently into the water. Within moments, the fish swarmed to the surface, their movements rippling like silver ribbons. Ella's lips curved, just a little. Not a smile with teeth or sound, but a smile all the same. At a nearby table, Victoria Lane had been working on her laptop. She looked up. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she saw something in her daughter's face that stopped her breath. The next afternoon, just as Kayla was wiping down the last of the lunch tables, a tall man in a dark suit stepped into the cafe. He didn't look like a regular, too polished, too precise, like he belonged outside of this little world of chipped mugs and checkered napkins. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. "Ms. Monroe?" he asked, his tone formal but not unkind. She blinked, still holding the damp cloth in her hand. "Yes. I'm with Mrs. Lane," he said. "She asked me to speak with you." Kayla's heart gave a small thump. She glanced behind him, half expecting to see Victoria Lane herself sweeping through the doorway in some tailored coat. But no, it was just him. He reached into his jacket and handed her a small, folded card. It was heavy, cream-colored paper with embossed lettering. The kind of stationery that smelled like money. "She would like to invite you to her residence," the man continued. "It's regarding her daughter." Kayla's brows knit. Her daughter. "She'd like you to help her, feed the fish." There was a beat of silence. "That's it?" Kayla asked, almost laughing from disbelief. "That's what she said. Just that." He paused. "Ella has asked for you." The mention of the little girl's name brought Kayla's mind back to the moment at the tank. The quiet awe, the small pinch of food, the way those brown eyes had softened just slightly as the fish swirled upward. Still, she shook her head. "I'm sorry. That's not a good idea." The driver didn't argue. He simply nodded, slipped the card onto the counter, and turned to leave. "If you change your mind, the address is there." Kayla stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the thick paper in her hand. Help her feed the fish. It sounded so simple. Too simple. But simplicity had never protected her before. A memory stirred, sharp and uninvited. 2 years ago, she'd worked at a nursing facility outside Macon. One of the residents, a sweet boy with autism, had grown attached to the koi pond in the courtyard. One afternoon, he'd wandered too close. A nurse panicked. Papers were filed. Kayla was let go. Failure to follow safety protocol, they said. But no one asked why the boy kept returning to the water. No one cared that he smiled more in those moments than during any therapy session. She hadn't worked in care since. So no, she wasn't about to walk into a billionaire's mansion and put herself in the same position again. She knew how quickly kindness could be misunderstood, how trust could be twisted. Kayla folded the card in half, then again, and slid it deep into her apron pocket. This time, she told herself, she would keep her distance. The next morning, Kayla found a small envelope tucked beneath the sugar jar at the counter. It wasn't sealed, just folded neatly, her name written in soft, uncertain letters on the front. The handwriting was clearly a child's. She opened it slowly. Inside was a crayon drawing, nothing fancy, just a fish tank drawn in thick, swirling blue. At the center, a tiny hand hovered above the water, scattering little dots. Around the glass were orange fish, smiling in that way only a child could imagine. And just beneath the picture, in shaky letters that curved awkwardly across the page, were 2 simple words. Fish lady. Kayla stared at it for a long moment. Her throat tightened. No one had called her anything like that before. Not in a way that felt like a name. Not like this. She turned the paper over, nothing on the back. No instructions, no explanation. Just a child's quiet way of saying I remember you. I need you. Kayla sat down, the envelope resting in her lap. The memories of her brother, the koi pond, the nursing home, all came rushing back. But so did the look in Ella's eyes. That gentle trust. That fragile beginning of something unspoken. It wasn't a request, not exactly. But it was a door. And Kayla, without fully knowing why, realized she couldn't let it close. From that day on, Kayla returned to the Lane residence every afternoon at noon sharp. The driver would greet her at the gate, and she'd carry the same small jar of fish food she always made herself, only now, each blend was organized by color. Pink for the guppies. Green for the bottom feeders. Gold flakes for the bright ones with fancy tails. It wasn't necessary really, but it made things feel more alive, more personal. And Ella seemed to notice. They never spoke, not with words. Each session took place in the sunroom, where a massive aquarium wrapped around two of the walls like a living curtain. It was quiet in there, soft, filtered light, the hum of the filter, the gentle sway of aquatic plants. For Ella, it was a world that didn't demand anything. Just observation. Rhythm. Stillness. Kayla would kneel beside her and show her how to tell the fish apart, not by names, but by patterns. See that one? She whispered one day, pointing to a long blue creature with sharp lacy fins. That's the ribbon. Ella looked, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. Another fish darted past. Orange with a white stripe. That's socks, Kayla said with a soft smile. Because it looks like he's wearing some. Ella's eyes followed the fish for a full minute before she reached for a sticky note and scribbled something. Just a single word, socks. From then on, Kayla brought sticky notes too. And colors. Ella began labeling the fish, ribbon, socks, leaf, blush. No proper names, just images translated into language she could hold. One afternoon, Kayla noticed Ella tapping her fingers against her knee. Not aimlessly, but with rhythm. 3 soft taps, then a pause. 2 taps. Another pause. It took a moment before Kayla realized. She was counting the bites. Every time a fish rose and snapped at the surface, Ella marked it with her fingers. Kayla leaned in and matched her pace. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. They smiled. Just slightly. But together. Soon, it became a ritual. Each day, Ella would wait in the sunroom with her little notebook, and Kayla would arrive with her custom blends and a new lesson. They counted dorsal fins. Measured how the fish turned before they fed. They created signs for hungry, fast, shy. All without saying a word. Ella never spoke. But she began to write. Short words at first, blue tail tiny. Then simple phrases, sleeping fish, fast one, socks likes green. And Victoria, though often sitting silently in the background with her tablet or phone, had started to lower the screen more and more. Watching. Listening, not with ears, but with something deeper. Something motherly and raw. But the sunroom wasn't about her. It belonged to Ella now. And to the quiet woman who had taught her to name the world in a language made of colors, movement, and trust. The sticky notes had become a language of their own. Every day, Ella would write something new, just 1 or 2 words, carefully printed in uneven block letters. At first, they were simple, blue fin small. Then came combinations that showed how she was starting to see the world differently. Long tail, silver fast, green shy. Sometimes she'd sketch beside them, a wobbly outline of a fish, or a dot for an eye. But it was the words that mattered most. They were fragments of thought she had never shared out loud. And now here they were, pressed onto the glass of the aquarium like quiet little windows into her mind. Kayla kept every note. She stuck them to a board she brought with her each day, lining them up so Ella could rearrange them, by color, by type, by mood. It wasn't therapy in the formal sense. There were no charts, no evaluations. Just patience, presence, and the deep kind of listening that didn't require sound. What Kayla didn't know, at least not at first, was that Victoria Lane had started canceling her meetings during the lunch hour. No announcement. No explanation. She would simply appear in the doorway of the sunroom, tablet in hand, then sit quietly on the bench along the wall. She didn't interrupt. She didn't speak. But she watched. And for Victoria, watching was not passive. This was a woman who had spent her life designing machines that could interpret neural signals in stroke patients. A woman who had poured millions into clinical trials for assistive technology, robotic arms, eye-tracking software, voice simulation apps. She had hired the best speech therapists, the finest specialists. She had studied every chart, read every paper. Nothing had brought Ella out of her silence. But this? This was a waitress with homemade fish food and paper notes. Victoria found herself returning to the same seat each day, her usual armor of detachment slowly peeling away. One afternoon, she left her tablet on the kitchen counter entirely. She walked in, sat down beside the tank, and folded her hands in her lap. Just sat. Ella didn't react, not at first. But she didn't withdraw either. Instead, she peeled off a sticky note, scribbled something in purple crayon, and stuck it to the glass directly in front of her mother. Mother fish. Victoria stared at it, her lips parting slightly. She looked at the fish drifting behind the note, then at her daughter. Her hand lifted, hesitant, and she touched the glass just below the words. "Is that me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ella didn't answer. But her fingers moved, just once, tapping lightly over her heart. It wasn't a word. It didn't need to be. And Victoria, the woman who had always believed in data, design, and results, found herself believing in something else that day. Something smaller. Something wordless. Something real. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, just as Victoria stepped into the sunroom with a cup of tea in hand. She found Ella on the floor beside the tank, arranging sticky notes like puzzle pieces while Kayla adjusted the water temperature with a quiet focus. There was no talking, no instruction, only the soft rhythm of paper being moved and fish gliding in silence. From behind her, the voice of the house manager cut through the stillness. "Mrs. Lane," he began, careful but firm, "I must say, this method seems unconventional. Possibly even inappropriate. There's no structure. No therapeutic framework. No credentialed oversight." Victoria didn't turn around. She sipped her tea and watched as her daughter pointed to a fish, then tapped her fingers twice on her leg. "She's not a licensed specialist," the manager continued. "If anyone were to ask." "She's not trying to be," Victoria interrupted quietly. The manager hesitated. "With all due respect, ma'am, I just don't see the benefit in." Victoria finally turned to face him, her voice calm but edged with something sharp and certain. "I haven't seen my daughter smile without me in the room in over 2 years." She let the words hang there for a moment. "Until now," she added. "So unless you have someone else who can do that, we're going to keep feeding the fish." The manager said nothing more, and Victoria returned to her seat beside the tank. The trouble began with a headline. It wasn't even from a major news outlet, just a grainy video posted to a parenting blog, accompanied by a caption that practically sneered. "Billionaire mom hires waitress to treat her disabled daughter with fish." Within hours, the clip had been shared across social media platforms. It showed a sunlit room, a young girl seated by a glowing fish tank, a woman kneeling beside her, holding out a jar of food. It was quiet, peaceful, harmless, really. But in the wrong hands, it looked like mockery, like eccentric privilege dressed up as therapy. Victoria Lane saw it on her tablet the next morning. Her assistant had tried to shield her, But the algorithm had done its work. It was there, front and center. And although there was no audio, no identifying name, she knew. She recognized Ella's silhouette. She saw the curve of Kayla's hand as she sprinkled food into the water. Her chest tightened. By noon, she had called the driver and requested Kayla meet her in the study. Kayla arrived without knowing what had changed. But the moment she stepped into the room, she felt it, the tension in the air, the coldness in Victoria's posture. The warmth that had slowly begun to thaw between them was gone. "Did you take a video of my daughter?" Victoria asked, skipping any greeting. Kayla blinked. "What? No. Of course not." "It's circulating online," Victoria said, sliding the tablet across the table. "Ella. The tank. Someone recorded it. It's viral." Kayla stared at the screen, stunned. "I didn't film this. I wouldn't." Victoria folded her arms. "Then who did?" "I don't know," Kayla said softly. "But it wasn't me. I would never exploit her." There was a long silence. Victoria's gaze didn't waver. "You understand how fragile this is. How private. She's not a case study. She's my child." "I know," Kayla whispered. "That's why I've never treated her like one." Victoria's jaw tightened, but her voice didn't rise. "Regardless of intent, this has created exposure I didn't ask for. Attention Ella didn't ask for." "I'm so sorry," Kayla said. "But I swear to you I didn't do this." Victoria turned away. Her voice, when it came, was quieter. "I need you to step back from this. From her. At least until I can get to the bottom of it." Kayla didn't argue. She just stood there, still holding the little jar of fish food in her hands, green lid today, Ella's favorite. She looked down at it, then back up at Victoria. "I understand," she said. And before she left, she placed the jar gently on the corner of the table, along with a folded piece of paper. No explanation. No plea. Just one sentence, written in her careful handwriting. "Some creatures only survive in quiet places. Some children too." She didn't wait for a response. And Victoria didn't offer one. Kayla didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or ask for another chance. She simply nodded once, quietly, and walked to the door of the study with slow, deliberate steps. Her fingers still curled around the little jar of fish food she had brought that day, the one with the green lid and the hand-drawn label that Ella had colored herself. She paused at the doorway. Then gently, she turned back and placed the jar on the edge of the side table near the aquarium filter, where the light was softest. Next to it, she laid a small folded note. No envelope, no signature, just paper creased from being carried in her pocket. Victoria didn't speak. She stood by the window, back rigid, watching the breeze stir the curtains. When Kayla was gone, the room felt heavier. Still. After a few minutes, Victoria approached the table and picked up the note. Her eyes scanned the words, written in Kayla's familiar hand. Neat, quiet, steady. Some creatures only survive in quiet places. And some children, too. She stood there holding the paper, unmoving. Outside the room, the house was silent. But inside, something had shifted. An ache, a question, a line drawn softly in the space between caution and trust. And the jar of fish food waited. It was the head of security who brought the footage to Victoria. "We reviewed the surveillance," he said, placing a flash drive on her desk. "The camera in the west hallway picked up someone entering the sunroom from the side door, around the same time the video must have been recorded." Victoria clicked open the file with trembling fingers. The grainy footage played out on her screen, an angle she recognized, the hallway just outside the glass-paneled sunroom. And then there it was, a man she hadn't seen in months. One of the former housekeepers, dismissed for misconduct. He moved quickly, glancing over his shoulder, a phone clutched to his chest as he pushed the door open just enough to catch the scene inside. Kayla and Ella, feeding the fish, heads bowed close together in the quiet hush of the room. So it hadn't been Kayla. Victoria exhaled slowly, a tightness in her chest unraveling piece by piece. Guilt stirred under her ribs. She had doubted the one person who had truly connected with her daughter. Later that day, she wandered into Ella's playroom, half out of habit, half because she didn't know what else to do with the weight inside her. Ella was there, curled on the rug with her sketchpad and crayons, the sun pouring through the window in golden sheets. Victoria didn't say anything. She just sat nearby, watching. After a few minutes, Ella tore a page gently from her pad and slid it across the floor toward her mother. No words. Just the soft shuffle of paper against carpet. Victoria picked it up. It was a drawing, crude but deliberate. A large rectangular tank stretched across the center, colored in soft blues and greens. Inside, fish swam in little arcs, each one with a tiny label scribbled beside it. But what caught her breath wasn't the fish. It was the two figures sitting beside the tank. One was taller, with short dark hair, clearly meant to be her. But the second one was unmistakable. Kayla. Victoria blinked, her eyes beginning to sting. She turned the page slightly, noticing a line of text at the bottom, written in Ella's careful, uneven print. Mom doesn't need to talk. She understands fish. She understands me. Victoria pressed her hand to her mouth. The tears came fast, quiet, unstoppable. This was the first time Ella had ever drawn another person into one of her pictures. Her world had always been just her and her mother, two figures locked in a silent orbit. But now there was someone else. Someone who had stepped inside that space without forcing the door. She looked at the drawing again, and something inside her cracked open. Not in a painful way, but in a necessary way. She folded the paper carefully, held it to her chest, and closed her eyes. Kayla had understood something no specialist, no machine, no algorithm ever had. And somehow, without ever asking for it, she had been invited into Ella's world. The morning air smelled like coffee and wet pavement as Victoria Lane stepped out of her town car and stood in front of the Glass Pond Cafe. It had been months since she last stood on that cracked sidewalk, months since she watched her daughter's world shift from silence to something deeper. She clutched a small box in her hands, a clean plastic container with a green lid, neatly labeled in Ella's handwriting, "For socks too." Inside was a fresh blend of fish food, made just the way Kayla used to do it. The bell over the cafe door jingled as she stepped inside. Nothing had changed. The same mismatched chairs. The same hum of the old fridge. And there, behind the counter, arranging mugs on a drying rack, was Kayla. She turned at the sound of the bell, her eyes widening slightly when she saw who it was. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Victoria said softly. Kayla set the mug down. "Not at all." There was a beat of silence between them, not cold, but careful. "She wanted me to give this to you," Victoria said, holding out the container. "There's a new fish. She says you're the only one allowed to name it." Kayla smiled, taking the box in her hands like it was made of glass. "She's still naming them by personality?" "Always," Victoria replied, her voice quieter now. "She says this one is shy but curious. Keeps swimming under the others." Kayla laughed gently. "Sounds like socks reincarnated." Victoria hesitated, then added, "I still don't fully understand what happened in that room between the two of you. But I've come to realize, it's not something that needs understanding." She looked down for a moment, then back up. "What she found with you, peace connection, it's not something I can replicate with a team of experts or $1 million research grant. And I don't want her to have to teach people how to understand her ever again." Kayla didn't speak right away. She just nodded, her throat tightening. "I wanted to ask," Victoria continued, "if you'd consider something more permanent. Not just for Ella. For other kids like her." Kayla didn't have to think long. The answer had been waiting inside her all along. 3 months later, They stood together in a wide, sunlit gallery with floor-to-ceiling tanks shimmering like stained glass. The room was quiet but alive, with a swish of fins, the hush of filtration pumps, and the occasional echo of laughter from children moving between the displays. Silent Waters was no longer just an idea. It was real. A sanctuary where neurodivergent children could explore the underwater world without pressure or noise. Where communication didn't need to be verbal to be valid. Where kindness wasn't a method, it was the foundation. At the center of the main exhibit, a familiar face stood beside a cylindrical tank. Ella wore a simple blue dress, her curls tucked behind her ears, a small notebook pressed to her chest. She looked taller now. Steadier. And when the small crowd gathered in front of her for the opening remarks, she did something no one expected. She raised her hand. Kayla stepped close, ready to support her if needed, but Ella didn't flinch. Instead, she pointed toward the fish swimming lazily in the central tank, then looked out at the quiet faces watching her. Her voice was soft. Nearly a whisper. "But fish don't need words," she said. "They listen with their hearts." She paused. "So do I." The room was silent. Then a wave of breath, gentle, amazed, moved, swept through the crowd. Kayla wiped a tear from her cheek. Victoria, standing in the back, pressed a hand to her heart. And Ella just smiled, the kind of smile that said she had found her voice long before she ever used it. If you believe that real love doesn't have to be loud, just true, and with the right person, leave a like on this video to let us know it touched your heart. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the quiet power of kindness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We'll see you in the next one.